Michael's a cool old friend and has one of the best gigs going with Downtown now. And this is I'll let him kind of explain what's going on, but it's a kind of newly launched label by an industry veteran, Josh Deutsch, and they had one of the biggest records of the year right out of the box, and they're a hot label and doing really well. And Michael knows every band ever, so he's.
You're being very generous. The the label is just a year old. We the guy who started the label was the head of A&R at Virgin Records when I was doing A&R at Virgin. So he hired me away from Virgin to do A&R and licensing for him. And we had the good fortune, I think, of releasing Gnarls Barkley very early in the label's career, which was only in April. So we're basically 9 months into it, and so far so good. We have a small but very kind of dedicated staff, and we're independently financed, so it's a bona fide indie label. It's not, a traditional kind of joint venture upstream situation, although in the case of Gnarls Barkley, we got involved with Atlantic Records just because of the sheer sort of enormity of what was happening with that. But all of the creative decision-making is ours, all of the strategy is ours, and all of the money that, goes along with those decisions is ours too. Mm-hmm. So it's, particularly as a music fan and somebody who's been kind of doing this, for a while and has seen kind of the somewhat restrictive, parameters of the major label versus what can be done at the indie level. I'm very pleased to be here.
So I invited Michael along because he's been an A&R guy for a while and is one of the guys that sort of gets flooded by bands, and I'm curious as to sort of what it is that the A&R community is looking for these days. What makes things stick out? Is it the song? Is it the story? Is it the management? Is it the touring history? Is it just a hit song? And it might be a lot of those things, but I'm curious what you think's going on out there right now.
Well, I think it's a lot of those things. Obviously, no one wants to walk away from a hit, but sort of the thing that I look for first and foremost is kind of the quality of the song, and if there is a star or a number of stars in the band, from what I can tell. I mean, it's tough to sort of qualify or quantify, but looking at a band, if I see somebody up there who's just radiating some kind of sheer star power that I can't take my eyes off him or her, that's certainly more appealing to me than walking in and seeing a band that looks like they could have been plucked out of the bleachers at Dodger Stadium, for example.
Right. So imaging is important?
I think image plays a role. I don't think it's role number one in the decision-making process. For me, it's always the song and whether the band can really kind of cut it live. And that's, obviously on the rock side. If you're talking about a pure sort of pop project, I think there are other ancillary factors that come into play, primarily image and, who's working in a production level and kind of who the manager is and what the radio story could possibly be with something like that, because you're taking a huge swing at pop radio, which is, not easy and not inexpensive to do.
Right. How many artists are you working with right now?
I work directly with 3 artists, but I work just kind of by default, I guess, with everybody on the roster, which is, I think, eight artists at this point. Gnarls, Cold War Kids, Wax on Radio, Art Brute, Eagles of Death Metal, Kevin, Michael, Quintus, so 7, and we have a couple of soundtracks. The Borat soundtrack, and I'm going to be releasing the Entourage soundtrack, which is the HBO show. Probably not something that your Australian colleagues know too much about, but it's a fairly popular HBO television program here.
Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think the climate right now is at the record labels. Maybe indie versus major, or just in general. You hear so much, like I was saying earlier, the doom and gloom, and are labels gun shy? Are they less important than they used to be? Are they more important?
Well, I'm fortunately, knock wood, a little bit removed at this point from sort of the major label perception of what's going on. I do hear a lot of general sort of negativity. On the major label side of things. I happen to think that it's a great time for music. I mean, people are obviously hungry for music. It's sort of the consumption pattern that's changing pretty dramatically. But as a music fan and somebody who is interested in the creative process and kind of discovering a number of new things, I think it's a particularly fertile time to be involved in doing what I do. So we're actively signing things. We don't sign a lot of stuff just because we're a small label, and what we want to do is sign things that we really believe in and we think have a shot at sort of a long-term career. We're not particularly interested institutionally in, kind of the one-hit wonder novelty, sort of, mindset, which, is perfectly fine on some levels, but just, I think as a sort of philosophy, for the label that I work for, it's just not part of the higher thinking.
Mm-hmm. And how are you discovering bands now? How are they approaching you? Are they approaching you? Are you approaching them? What's the main pathway you're finding?
A little bit of both. I think a number of, fortunately, because of the sort of the profile that downtown has achieved in a relatively short amount of time, I think a lot of people have kind of perked up and are sending stuff in just somewhat blind, hoping that we'll take a listen to it with some level of seriousness. But I generally tend to rely on people, contacts that I know, people in your position, ASCAP, BMI, entertainment attorneys, managers, musicians that I know, people in radio programming, journalists. I read some blogs. I do a little bit of kind of quantitative research, and I think it's a little bit of all of those things. Generally, it's a referral, though. It's not something that I just kind of pick up a demo and happen to be blown away by it.
And as a quick note, while you just reminded me, entertainment attorneys in the United States take a much larger role in shopping material than do entertainment attorneys in Australia. And I think we find in LA and New York there's a lot of really influential entertainment attorneys that have taste, and the bands might not even have a manager, and they almost act like a manager and try to get the deal.
Yeah, a lot of them are sort of de facto managers, particularly for developing bands. And in some cases, as the major labels are kind of shedding bands that, who are sort of falling beneath a specific sales level and are between deals, entertainment attorneys are very impactful and influential in making things happen for them.
So let's move on to South by Southwest. When you're in Austin, there's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. What do you do? What do you do to how do you figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to see?
I don't know. That's a good question. I every year I kind of draft up what I think is going to be a general itinerary, and almost without exception, the second I step off the plane, it kind of goes to hell. So I try to keep a pretty open daytime schedule, just to kind of hop from event to event and take some meetings and attempt to do a number of things that might just come up sort of on the fly. In the evenings, I have a pretty good idea from maybe 7 o'clock on of what I'm going to do. There are almost without exception 6 or 7 shows that that I'll either want to or have to see on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this year, I guess. And so daytimes are generally a little more flexible than evenings, but inevitably things fall behind schedule, and you miss gigs, and you run into people that you don't expect to run into, and it's just kind of catch as catch can in some respects.
Mm-hmm. I often give advice to bands, and I wonder if you agree with this. Some Australian bands come over, and they're over here for 1 week, and they try to get their whole career's worth of work done in 1 week, and they're very I guess very antsy and stressed about getting their CDs to everybody. And I say, number one, you got to keep your expectations managed in terms of how much you're going to get done. You need to be over here time and time again, and you need to hear about people, tastemaker, entertainment music buyers, I guess you would call yourself, need to hear about the band from several people besides just the manager and the band and me or whatever. I wonder, that list that you end up seeing at South by Southwest at night, you've heard about those bands from many people?
Generally, yes. I mean, there are maybe 5 to 10% of the 60 bands that I see are something that just came to me recently, and I don't have really much background on. But almost without exception, as you said, it's a number of people who have either told me about them or I've read about them in various publications or on different blogs, or I've spent time with the music enough to kind of know what I'm getting into. But I think generally the more sort of ammunition you have in a kind of across the board way is better. Mm-hmm.